morning. Ooh. Gonna have a little height adjustment. Thank you all for having me and for the introduction. As you heard, my name is Emiko Atherton, and I'm the director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a program of Smart Growth America. You heard from the council president, but most of you in Florida know us through Dangerous by Design. And it was funny, I was talking with Trenda McPherson this morning that one of the reasons I love coming to Florida, and actually come to Florida a lot, because of that, of the report. But I think the story that we don't get to tell as much is that, the story of successes and what's the good that's going on here. And I told Trenda, I think that probably you all think of me as generally the bearer of bad news. That's but I spend a lot of time going around many of those those communities, and we referenced, there are 1,300 complete streets policies now in the country, and I spend a lot of time in many of them, and really we do talk up Florida at Smart Growth America. We talk up kind of, although there's absolutely a safety crisis here, and I'm going to talk specifically about the health crisis as well, all of you are doing a lot of amazing work to change that. So I just wanted to thank you for all of that. I'm going to be talking about, if I can get this to work, that on button is amazing. Kind of a different stage, which is this idea of health and health equity, and why this is, I think, as much of a crisis in this country. We are killing just as many people, I think, health-wise, that we are safety-wise. A quick introduction to the coalition. I'm sure probably, has everyone in the room heard of the coalition? Has anyone not? That's great. Perfect. So we are I'll just talk briefly about us. We are we are a coalition because we are led, and I am really led, by a group of organizations who created the Complete Streets movement in 2004, and have really continued to lead from all different perspectives, kind of this movement towards, I'd say, safer streets, but economically vibrant streets, healthy streets where regardless of who you are, how you travel, you can access work, your place of worship, healthcare, healthy food, education. You will see, and this is really exciting for us, that actually this year we had our first city Department of Transportation join the coalition. It was the city of Orlando. I'm sure probably many of you know Billy Hadaway for his work on Complete Streets, and we were so excited to welcome our first kind of city DOT and city to joining the coalition. I show this slide, even though many of you are familiar with the coalition, because it shows the diverse kind of interest groups and organizations and companies that are committed to Complete Streets. So as you all go out and do your work, thinking about kind of who's not in this room that maybe you invite next year. I saw AARP was a partner, but bringing in the realtors, bringing in more public health. We work with the Heart Association and the American Public Health Association, the landscape architects, who is out there, a lot of the firms that do this work, the Institute for Transportation Engineers. And so we always think about, and one of the things is this is a crisis, this is a health crisis, this is a safety crisis, and we're not going to do it, we're not going to fix it alone, and we need all of those partners. So we know a lot about the benefits of Complete Streets, I think, and this is where I'm turning into to talk about health. The economy came up number one, because I think that's one of the reasons we're really interested in this. People, not just millennials, but those of us like myself who aren't, us Gen Xers, and I think older adults want to live in walkable, bikeable places. People want to age in place. Businesses are locating in communities where they can attract talent. We had an office pool, or we have, I should say, an office pool going on at Smart Growth America for the Amazon HQ headquarters. I mean, of course, we've never had a football pool, but we have an Amazon pool. And it was interesting because I think the Amazon thing really brought to bear what's going on economically, and where businesses want to locate. my vote. I'll refrain on where unless I win, and then I'll reveal my choice. But sustainability, we have. I think resilience is an issue that comes up for all of us, particularly in a state like Florida, and that we need to start making more sustainable choices. And part of that is shifting modes. Part of that is changing the way we build infrastructure and building in things like stormwater management into our infrastructure. Mobility choices, that there is a large desire for people that want to be multimodal, and we also have a large segment of the population that relies on alternative means of transit to get around. There's also equity issues. I think this comes up in our safety report. So in Dangerous by Design, we didn't just look at the most dangerous places, but who has the highest risk, or what we call the pedestrian danger index. And regardless of where you are in the country, if you are a person of color or an older adult, you are significantly more likely to be, your relative risk of being hit and killed by a car is up to twice as high, and it's compounded if you are a older adult who is a person of color. So once you hit 65 or ages or plus, and you're a person of color, you are twice as more likely, regardless of where you are in the country, to be struck and killed while walking on America's streets. Cost. So we're looking at kind of smarter ways to build projects. And we are finding that actually through some of our state DOT work, building projects that I think we call them like right-sizing projects, are really trying to not doing things the same old way, which is kind of over-designing roads, actually saves costs. They are cheaper to deliver. And then health, which is really what I'm talking about today. So why are we talking about health when we're talking about streets? This came out about 2 weeks ago, but there was a new report by the CDC that showed that nearly 4 in 10 Americans are not just overweight but are obese. And I should say all of the data I will cite today is new CDC data. This shows, and I can send everyone a link to this, and let me find if I can find the pointer. So this shows adults and kind of how obesity rates are rising. They've somewhat stagnated out in adolescence, but we can see this kind of sharp increase here from, around 2000, we had about 30% of the population was obese, and now we're hitting 40%. This shows by breaking it down by gender and by age, and you can again see that it gets even higher than 40% for women who are 40 to 59. So this is right about where I live and my age, and where we're falling. And then we broke it down by states, and I'm sure you can all find yourself here, but that's in the 25 to 30%. I didn't show, just in the interest of time, kind of how things have changed over the last decade, but the areas are getting darker. Every state has been they've actually had to add new categories of this since they started collecting this data. Like, when they started, they didn't have, and I think this, they didn't have the over 40%. So Florida, another way of looking at it is that Florida's at 27.4% of Floridians are considered obese. No state now has less than 20%. And then when you looked at race data, this is interesting. So if you kind of keep your eye where we are in Florida, so overall, again, so this is non-Hispanic white adults are around the 25% to 30%. But then when you look at non-Hispanic black adults, it goes up significantly. And this is data that just came out. And then we looked at Hispanic adults. So you can see when you actually, much like we did in Dangerous by Design, start to break things down by, I talked about, age, gender, but then race, it tells a much more nuanced and much more alarming story. Here's some other ways of looking at it. I'm sorry, the screen is tall, but kind of this will show, and I encourage all of you to go to the CDC website where you can start to break it down even farther. Trends, this is again shows the percentage on the left of those who are obese and adults who are overweight in Florida. So why do I talk about, why does this matter? Why are we talking about health at a summit about transportation? And we're seeing that the problem has not, setting up chronic disease has huge implications, I think, on it has huge implications kind of beyond just, it has financial implications. So, the amount that people are missing work, the amount that we're spending on healthcare, the impact on actually security or national safety. I work with a group called Mission Readiness. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of them, but they're a group of retired generals, and they are interested, and they are interested now in complete streets because they have done a report where nearly 1 in 4 young adults who are eligible for military service are not fit to serve. So this is like a national security issue. So this, not only are we more unproductive and not showing up to work and facing billions of dollars in healthcare costs, but this becomes a security issue. So what do we do? Why does this matter, and why does street design matter? Why does health equity matter? So the idea of health equity is that we all, we need to set up our systems so that all of us can have the highest level of health for all people. The example that I like to give is I am from the Seattle area in Washington State, and I worked with the Seattle-King County Department of Public Health when I was at the county, and we were doing a look at kind of health outcomes, and by health outcomes I mean rates of chronic disease like blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes throughout the county. And where I happened to live at the time, my neighborhood, my census block, had a health outcome of countries in Scandinavia. Like, we were the healthiest people, actually in the country. I also lived next to the University of Washington, and in this beautiful, like next to this arboretum, where if you went like a quarter mile over, you hit the bridge, which took you right to the Microsoft campus. So you can imagine the income level in that neighborhood as well was extraordinarily high. I worked for an elected official at the time who represented an area south of Seattle, next to the airport, and those census blocks had health outcomes of developing countries in Africa. And I could get between the two of them in 15 minutes. And then when we started to overlay it with kind of infrastructure, there was very poor transit service. There was no sidewalks. You would die if you tried to bike in these communities, and so and they were very low income. So access to things like the gym, like I could walk. I walked to yoga. I walked to the gym. I walked to the equivalent of a convenience store in my neighborhood, which was an organic food market. And this area was also a food desert. So people had higher levels of. There were a higher number of households who didn't have access to a car. There was no access to healthy food, and there was no safe way to get to these places. So people ended up eating food from, the Chevron station or the Shell station, and so that's, we worked, and we actually got some funding through the CDC, the Communities Putting Prevention to Work, to do safe routes to schools and complete streets in these communities. The CDC recognizes that, they just came out, this is a group, a kind of diverse coalition that put together this community guide, which is essentially, we have a health problem, and what are the solutions? And complete streets is right there. You can find this as one of the strategies that the CDC has identified to start achieving health equity. And this just shows some more, I'm sorry, these are very hard to see, but essentially when you give people access, when you give people safe access to recreation or to accessing, again, their social appointments, their places of worship, education, when we have safe routes to schools, people start moving again, and it has direct impacts on health. And we can achieve, and it's one of the ways to achieve health equity. It's one of the best things that we can do. This is really where I'm going to leave it, but I'm excited for this panel today, which is, I think in some of my message is that, we have a safety crisis in the country. We have a safety crisis in Florida. We also have a health crisis, and they are, it is equally as alarming, and it is killing more people. But we also know, like our safety crisis, we know that we have solutions, and that we know we have the people that have solutions, I think, who are up here today, and all of you in the room. And so I encourage you, as you think about kind of the problems you're trying to solve in Florida, kind of the multiple goals and the multiple partners you can think about to achieve that. So thank you.